Okay, my loves. I know there are a lot of you that are out there that are really wondering, how do I even set boundaries anymore? Maybe you didn't grow up with great boundaries. Maybe boundaries weren't really modeled well for you, or maybe you were told that you cannot have boundaries. Maybe you're tired of being gaslighted in your relationships, and you're tired of feeling crazy all the time and guilty for trying to make a difference in your life. If this is you, then I want you to come schedule a call with me. Let's chat about the Unashamed Image Program. The Unashamed Image Program is geared towards you specifically. I am going to be helping you in our next upcoming session of the Unashamed Image. I am personally going to train you how to not feel crazy when someone is gaslighting you, how to be able to stand your ground, to keep your boundaries intact, and to also see through the bull crap. I am also going to be teaching you how to set really confident boundaries that you can really rely on. And I'm going to help you communicate them in a way that really makes sense. Basically, I'm going to help you live a life free of shame and on your terms. If you are ready and you are done feeling all the shame and guilt for trying to set boundaries, if you are not willing to live another moment the way you are right now and in somebody else's shadow, then this is the time to schedule that call with me. It's completely free, no pressure, just love, just support. Go to www.erinandersonthetraumacoach.com. Scroll down the page to where it says, Let's Chat About Working Together. Click on that button and it'll take you to my booking page. If you're ready to live the unashamed life, schedule that call. Let's get you in the Unashamed Image Program, my loves. From my heart to your heart. Bye. Welcome to the other side of the struggle. This is a podcast where we talk about trauma, how to heal it, and then how to take it and use it to unlock your mission and your potential, and to use it to live your very best dream life. When you're dealing with betrayal trauma, it can be hard to know how to heal it, how to stop the pain, and to know what your next steps are to take in your own life. And these are the questions that we try to answer here. Trauma has the ability to rob us of our joy and identity, which is why it's so miserable to experience. But with the right tools and with the right mindset, we can totally reclaim that joy and even use this trauma to strengthen ourselves, so that way trauma does not knock us off of our joy again. Living your dream life should be a non-negotiable, but trauma tends to try to negotiate that with you. And even though trauma is not something that we will completely ever be free of in our life, the pain is negotiable. This is why I created Erin Anderson Betrayal Trauma Coaching and this podcast, is because I want my listeners, I want my clients to live, truly live free from the prison that trauma can put you in. I want you to live on the other side of the struggle. Trauma can be a beast. It has the potential to get you to believe things about yourself that just aren't true. Things like, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving, I'm not beautiful, and the list goes on. And each one of those beliefs cause a crack in our hearts. And I get it. going through my own betrayal trauma, these were a lot of the things that I used to think, plus many others. So, when I had the meditation to see each one of those cracks as a way of healing, and not just of healing a flesh and blood heart, but the ability to heal a flesh and blood heart to gold, was transformational. And now I want to give you that exact same transformation for free. Pick up my Heart of Gold meditation. It is absolutely free, and I want to see it give you the exact same transformation that it did me. So check out the description below. Pick up the Heart of Gold meditation. The link is right there in the description. And while you're at it, don't forget to click on the Calendly link above to make sure that you schedule some one-on-one time with me to help you personally get through your betrayal trauma. All right, with that, let's listen to this week's episode. Welcome back to another episode of The Other Side of the Struggle, guys. And we have Kyson back with us today. And I know you guys love Kyson probably just as much as I do. It's so much fun having just, so many fantastic minds, being able to come on to the podcast. And we're talking about generosity this month. And you guys are probably gonna hear my little girls in the background. One of them's yelling. But we're talking about generosity this month. And last week, we talked about being generous with yourself. But this week, I want to talk with Kyson about how to be generous with yourself when you have nothing left to give, or when you feel like you have nothing left to give, or how can you be generous with anyone when you feel like you have nothing left to give. And this is like a major thing, Kyson, that I hear a lot, and I'm sure you do too, of like, how do I give my wife what she needs? How do I give my family what they need when I feel so completely like my bandwidth is totally met?
Yeah. Oh, totally. It maybe shows up in like slightly different language, but it's the same exact or same feeling, same energy. I hear a lot of scorekeeping and then feeling like, oh, I'm doing so much. I'm already a pretty common one is like I'm already working from like the moment I wake up till the moment I go to sleep. And, it's
Mm.
not enough. It's not enough.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Like that, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. And it is a little bit different. Like you're totally right. But like, isn't that interesting? Like that's something that not enough keeps coming up. Like it
Hmm.
is the thing that we keep hearing.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So what's your take on that? Like, there's not enough bandwidth. There's not enough this. There's not enough. There's not enough. There's not enough. What is your take on that?
um, I feel like I'll probably have like three different takes on it, but the first one that's in my heart is to think about sacrifice versus consecration. I think it's pretty common in world culture, church culture. We sometimes like worship the sacrifice, almost like if sacrificing more is always good. That's kind of the attitude. And when I first started like learning about this, I looked at the hymn, or I like noticed like, oh, interesting. It says like sacrifice brings forth the blessings of heaven, which I think is true as long as it's a true sacrifice. Um, so I'm trying to like wrap this back to like, if you feel like if your bandwidth is, all taken up, you feel like you have nothing left to give, there will probably be some areas where you're over giving, or you're giving in a way that's not in alignment with truth and love,
Oh, yeah.
that instead you're actually sacrificing out of like fear and perceived need, like, oh, or like I have to.
Ah, yes, totally. You were saying like sacrificing out of fear, sacrificing out of need. So tell me a little bit more about that. Like that is like juicy, crazy good content right there. And like I totally understand what you're saying because, I look back at the me that was still like really drowning in, this pain and this victim, the betrayal. And to now, like it's totally true. Like what I was sacrificing then, like killed every single one of my energies, mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. Like I just had no bandwidth, and my bandwidth was like this, like you guys can't see this, like listeners, but it was like an inch thick, and now it's a totally different ball game. But tell me, like, what do you mean? Like, what kind of things do people sacrifice? Do you feel that um, causes this kind of a sinking feeling?
That's crazy that you said a sinking feeling, because that's what I was thinking about. Is um I noticed in myself at one point, this, like, I felt this sinking, like this idea that sacrifice, I would call it service and even call it love, but I was actually giving things that weren't actually appropriate to give, sacrificing my boundaries, sacrificing my voice,
Ah,
sacrificing my connection with people, right? Like sacrificing things that aren't meant to be sacrificed. And so I started to notice, like, okay, what? Oh my gosh, check this out. This is such a crazy connection, where I was like, I used to think of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice as he did the thing that was the worst for him, but it was best for us, right? So like it was the worst for him. He suffered, he died, but it was the best for us. So that's love, and that's a sacrifice. But what's so crazy is if you put the word eternally on there, all of a sudden Jesus actually did what was best for us eternally. It was also best for him eternally because it was his mission, and it was best for the Father eternally. And so I started going like, wait a second, is it there? Maybe there's a difference between true sacrifice and false sacrifice. And if you think of the feeling of, you know, of that sacrifice of Jesus Christ, it has this rising feeling. It's this feeling of consecration where it's offered up and he's raised up. And so I started going like, okay, maybe true sacrifice. And I know I'm still in like principle land here. I'm not giving very
no,
specific,
this is
but
great. Oh my gosh. Do not say you're sorry for this because, like, I'm just like,
yeah,
tell
I
me
mean,
more.
it's a life altering, for me, it's a life altering set of breakthroughs. And I had a lot of
Yeah.
cool resources that helped me find these things. But noticing, okay, the feeling of a true sacrifice is actually that I'm raised up and I'm expanded. And I had been doing the opposite, where I felt like, oh, I need to, like, even in dumb things like the way I do the dishes, and like it's a sacrifice, and I'm getting, I'm cutting off a piece of me, and like, woe is me, I'm going to do the dishes so that I finally deserve whatever, versus like, I'm going to consecrate this effort right now, and give it out of a true loving sacrifice that's best for me, best for the other person, and best for God. um I have more to, like, there's more stuff I could say, but that's the root of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, like, there's something you said there, like at the beginning about how it's not appropriate. Like, whoa. Like, what a paradigm shift right there. It's not appropriate to sacrifice your voice, your mind, or your joy for crying out loud,
Oh yeah, wow.
right? Like, and that's something I see all the time. That's what I was doing, like sacrificing all of that, and my joy went along with it, right?
Yeah.
And oh man, I felt terrible, but it's like you said, like we really, I think, need to be mindful of what are we being generous with? You know, what do we think generosity means? And why do we feel like we're completely drained? You know, now, like being generous makes me feel like a fantastic human. Whereas being generous before made me feel like I had to give something I didn't have.
Hmm.
But you think about like Christ's atonement, like what a great, like, let's just tie this back to the greatest act of generosity ever, you know, which is the reason why we have the season of generosity is because God was generous with his son to us. He gave us a savior for crying out loud. That's the reason why we have Christmas, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then Christ was generous with his life. But why? Because you hit the nail on the head because it was right. It was the best thing for Christ and God too, not just us. Like we get that. But it
Yeah.
was the best thing because you know what? That is what was his crowning thing on this earth. Yeah, it was not like, don't get me wrong, it's not like I want to go do that, right? But it was because he was a fantastic human. And I guarantee that this and the Savior never questioned whether or not he was of divine birth. Never. And what a great mind to have. Like what a fantastic viewpoint to never question his divinity so that way he could accomplish his mission.
Hmm.
If you think about like oh, I'm going on this kick here, Kyson. I hope you're okay with this, but
Right.
like I think about when the adversary came and tempted Christ, you know, in the Bible in the New Testament.
Uh,
And he tempted him with all things, like he tempted him with three things, okay? He tempted him with worldly glory. He tempted him with giving up what he knew was coming. Like, I'm pretty sure the Savior was like, and he did. He said that, is there any other way? Like, Lord, if let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but thine be done. Right? He's like, but if this is the only way, I'll do it.
yeah.
He tempted him to give that up and worship the adversary as the God. And he also tempted him with um, worldly sustenance, food. Okay? Those were the temptations. And these are the temptations that we face. You know,
Yeah.
we worry about our food. We worry about our relationships. We worry about being seen as who we truly are because the Lord was not often. He was often totally not seen because the people around him could not see it, right?
Yeah.
And what does he do? He spoke truth in every single one of those instances. He never once allowed the adversary to tell him that he was worth less. He was trying to tempt him with things that did not match his worth.
Hmm.
Isn't that interesting? And the Lord didn't buy it because he knew who he was.
Yeah.
Isn't
Yeah.
that cool?
It's beautiful. It's really interesting. A connection I hadn't made before, like as you're saying that, is that we say Jesus gave everything, sacrificed everything, but he didn't sacrifice his voice, or he didn't sacrifice truth. He didn't sacrifice his worth. Um,
Boundaries. He didn't sacrifice his
boundaries.
boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he did allow himself to be like beaten and killed, but I think you're right in the other places of like boundaries, right? You think of like how cool it is that he'd give a stern response at point, or like a bold response to
Yeah.
some. He definitely had. I would imagine he had perfect, amazing boundaries, and
Yeah,
it's
well, and like
cool.
his like the boundary that was the most precious to him is I will not forsake my father.
Yeah.
And he never like he allowed himself to be killed because he would not forsake that boundary,
Hmm.
right? And so that's what I mean when I say like, he didn't allow these boundaries, like he
Totally.
didn't let those go because those were the most precious to him. And even the physical body, like it brings us joy, but nothing, and he understood this, like nothing can bring us more joy than being generous with God.
Yeah. And especially if we're aligning, and it's not like that's a, sometimes it's not super black and white, especially if you're caught in a place of like, I feel like I'm already giving everything. A lot of times we're doing it from a should type of attitude. What should I do? Right. What is a perfect, what does a good mother or father look like? What am I supposed to do in this role? And I think a lot of times we imagine that those shoulds come from God when they actually, when you look, like I imagine in my mind actually looking, where's the source of the should? And when I do that, I'm almost always like, oh, it's not God. God
No,
asks, what do you desire? What would you love to receive? How can I support you? And he does invite us to
exactly.
sacrifice, but it's in a consecration type energy where we can be opened up, expanded. He gives it right back to us, or
Yeah.
he opens us up more.
So I have something to ask you because you're right. He does not should on us. Like
Right.
I remember I think it was Tiffany Peterson that said, "Don't should on yourself," right? But um I think I know what you're going to say, but I still want to hear. Like I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. If we're not supposed to should, what do you call the commandments?
Yeah, that is definitely a question. um, I think the place where should become, so I almost always say, like, if there's a should, there's almost always an untruth beneath it. The place
Mm-hmm.
where I'll make an exception there is to say, you can say should or need as long as it's it's being spoken of as a requirement. So if you want to receive or abide in my love, thou shalt do this. If you desire to receive certain blessings, then you shall keep the commandments. So thou shalt is a you will, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. And yeah, I'm sure someone could bend that into a you should, but what you're really saying is if you want this, then you should probably do this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a should. A should on its own has no foundation. I don't know if that's
Right.
clear enough to say it that way.
Yeah, no, 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 it does. It does. See, and here's my thoughts about the commandments, okay? Because I've heard this. I have actually heard that argument given. That's why I asked. And my thoughts were that those are not shoulds. The Lord does not should on us. What those are they are paths
Hmm.
to joy. Because I'll tell you something. There's 10 commandments, right? And it feels like we have to keep every single one perfectly. But there's a reason why the greatest commandment is to love the Lord. Because if you do that, like it's like everything else just kind of comes together. And the second commandment is to love thy neighbor as thyself. We forget that part.
Yeah.
We've got to love ourselves. Like, and I actually talked about this in my last podcast. If we loved our neighbor as ourselves, would we be having backyard barbecues with them, laughing, playing games, and have like the best relationship ever? Or would we be having the neighbor wars feuds of the century? Which one would we be having? And, you know, this is like the thing. Like, if you want, it really comes down to what it is you want. If you want a good relationship with your neighbor, then you have to treat them well. If you want a good relationship with yourself, you have to treat yourself well. If you
Yeah.
want a good relationship with God, love Him. Treat him, yourself, and your neighbor well. That's it. And everything else just falls into place. Because seriously, are you like, if you have a crazy awesome love relationship with God, are you gonna go like rob a bank? No, right? So like that's like the concept here. It's not a should. It is a path. It is a path to joy,
Yeah.
right? Um, so we've got like just a few more minutes here, but let's like really, really hit this topic. Like if you're feeling like you don't have any bandwidth to be generous. And like we've talked, I think there's like a lot of really good stuff in here. But if they don't feel like they have the bandwidth to be generous, what do we tell them? So how do you feel about boundaries? It's a legitimate question. A lot of people come to me really struggling with this concept. They often feel guilty for setting boundaries, or they're not sure about even what a boundary is. You know, they've heard the term, set the boundary, things like that, but that's really confusing for them because it's not something that's well taught in our society nowadays, right? They know that boundaries are really important to having healthy, constructive, supportive, and wonderful relationships, but why? And oftentimes they also know that they feel like their boundaries are being violated, but they can't quite pinpoint what the boundary is that's being violated. That's why I've created the Clarifying and Creating Your Boundaries free PDF. You can find out what your boundaries are, how to tune in to what the boundary needs to be, and how to effectively create and communicate your boundary so that way you stay in this place that respects you, respects the other person, but also gives you the confidence in your boundaries so that way you stop being gaslighted, disrespected, and unseen. Having your boundaries really clear gives you a voice and also helps the other person stay in accountability with themselves. So that's not a role that you have to take on anymore. So if you are ready to really have clear boundaries, to really understand what your role is in the boundary, and to give yourself some safety and some protection against people that might try to gaslight you or are just being disrespectful, go grab my Creating and Clarifying Your Boundary PDF at erinandersonthetraumacoach.com. And while you're there, let's schedule a call with me. Come have a chat with me so that way I can really, really help you master this particular skill, creating boundaries, clarifying the boundary, communicating that boundary, and so that way I can also help you have relationships that show up to support you, cherish you, and love you.
Yeah, I'm like just taking a nice deep breath on that question just to find some good truth. For me, question one, I mean, it'd be to get with God and say, okay, can you help me discern where am I sacrificing out of fear versus consecrating? Like, can I like start to actually identify some things? Are there some places where I could be receiving some support? Then that would free up some space to give generously. And maybe I tend to go into like the huge overarching concept, but at least my thought is that if you're overgiving and your bandwidth feels full, it's worth asking, are you trying to be generous but without the savior by your side?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Because maybe you're not supposed to do it all on your own. That maybe by nature that is a false sacrifice if you're trying to do things on your own.
Oh, I agree. I totally agree. And like the other thing that comes to my mind is if you're feeling depleted, you need to be generous with yourself.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because when you're trying to give, 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 and you don't have anything left to give, that's when it's time to fill up your bucket, right? And that's what this relationship with God does, is it fills up your bucket.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean, like, some people might be able to go get a massage. Like, that fills up my bucket. But I also love crafting. I love painting. I love creating. Like, I love having fun with my gifts and my, excuse me, I'm having hiccups, but my gifts and my talents. Like, I love being creative, but I love being creative and I love giving myself time to be gifted and creative and to really sink into, like, this piece of me that really lights me up. Now, the next thing I hear, like, somebody almost saying is, I don't have time. I don't have money. I don't have these things. There's nothing I can create with. There's nothing. And I would disagree, but what do you say to that?
Dang, I was hoping you would do that one. Like I also disagree. Man, I honestly I would say like you're welcome to live in that reality. Like you can keep believing that you have nothing, no space to create. But would you be willing to that person, right? Would you be willing to take a deep breath right now and give yourself 30 seconds to just be yourself, to be human and not be sacrificing or freaking out about something, but just to breathe? And that's a tiny proof of like you've got 30 seconds, you've got 2 minutes, see if you can allow yourself to I think there's a different answer that my heart wants to say, but like give yourself the space to create a little bit at a time. Give yourself 2 minutes, give yourself 10 minutes. Sometimes a great way to be generous to yourself is to ask for help.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, follow. I don't know. What would you say to that?
Well, and sometimes I'll be honest, like, there's not help available.
Sure.
Like, that's why I'm here. That's why, there's kids in the background today. That's why we've had to pause this podcast twice, already, is because, one, my little girl was screaming and I had to pause it. Second one, my other little girl just came knocking on the door, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," right? Um, but here I am still creating a podcast. I hear people saying, well, what they're really saying is, I want to take hours for myself.
Hmm.
This is the reason why, like, they're not able to really give. It's because what happens naturally is you will shut down so that way you can refill. But the reason why you're not refilling is because you were literally shooting holes in your bucket, and the bullets are called guilt, right? You get so guilty for not doing anything. At least that's what happened with me. I got so guilty for not doing anything that I didn't do anything, right? But okay, you know what? Sit down all day long, you know? S Snack, make popcorn, whatever it is, and sit down and binge watch something for the day. The difference is don't shoot it out with guilt.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay if you have to take a week and do absolutely nothing. But I guarantee that if you don't add guilt to it, at the end of the week, you will have some bandwidth,
Totally.
something to give, right?
Yeah. I was going to toss in there, say no to something.
Yeah, say
Tell
no.
somebody no and say, I'm going to take that time for me. There's got to be a place where you can say no.
Mm-hmm.
Do it with love, but like say no.
Yeah, yeah. Otherwise, you say no to not changing your toddler's diaper for the day. But Kyson and I were just talking about, like, where I was at mentally before we started this podcast, like when I was in full victim mode and felt like I had nothing left to give. But you're talking like we're talking to you audience as two people who've been there. And what changed was one, we stopped shitting on ourselves. We stopped guilt tripping ourselves for not doing the things we thought we should do, right? Like should and guilt, they are like so intertwined.
Yeah.
And we gave ourselves permission to be human, permission to sit on our duffs all day long if we needed to. Like, we finally gave ourselves permission to hurt and honored the space that we were in. And then now look what we create. Like, we're able to be crazy generous now because of just those few little things. Like, we just refused. Like, it was an immediate boundary that I think you and I both put in. Like, I'm not going to be guilty anymore. I'm not going to shit on myself anymore. I am going to give myself love, and I'm going to love myself like my Savior did. Right?
Beautiful. Yeah. That feels awesome. To me, that feels like a complete, feels like, okay, that's something to go and think about and go feel through.
Awesome. Okay, well, it was a short podcast today, guys. But I really appreciate everybody hanging out with Kyson and I for today. Kyson, you've got a new podcast, right? You
Yes.
can go. Okay, what is the podcast?
The Kyson Kid podcast. So there it is, the Kyson Kid podcast. It's on all the places that have podcasts.
Awesome. So go check out his podcast too, especially if you guys are looking to heal more trauma. And also if you are a husband or a guy that's looking, or even a woman, like heavens, like we get addictions too. So if you're ready to heal some addiction, check out Kyson's podcast as well. All right, Kyson, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. I will see you very soon because we love talking to you.
Yep, thanks. We'll talk to you so soon.
Okay, see you next time, listeners. Bye. Hey, fabulous listener. I have a question for you. How done with trauma are you? Are you ready to uplevel your life and start creating the dreams that you thought were out of your reach? Are you ready to be free of the choices of other people? Are you ready to start living a life for yourself and creating the dreams that you want? And are you ready to start attracting relationships that show up to support those dreams? Are you also ready to create an amazing and deep love and trust in yourself and your decisions? If this is an absolute yes, then I want to invite you to come and join my 7-day Unashamed Chalk Talk. In this 7-day course, we are going to be going over each one of the 7 pillars for living an unashamed and completely self-trustful life. You will have some very quick, very concise, but powerful assignments to do every day. Plus, you also get access to me live for 7 days. You are going to get to learn how to set the goals that you want to achieve in your life completely unashamed, and also how to figure out what it is that's out of alignment in your life and stopping you from achieving those goals. Then we're going to get into how to get your brain to actually listen to the things that you want and start working on creating them. and also how to give yourself permission to truly love and care for yourself in an amazingly, fabulously fun way, and also how to regain the confidence and love that you deserve to give yourself, despite what anyone else thinks, says, or does about you. Now I can almost hear you say, okay, well, that sounds great, but how much does it cost? That is also an exciting part of this. It's only $97. How awesome is that? For only $97, you can start creating the changes you want. There's literally no reason for you to not click on the link in the description below and get started. Come join me today in the Unashamed Chalk Talk, and I'll see you on the other side. Hey guys, thanks so much for hanging out with me today and listening in on this podcasting episode. Don't forget to tune in next week. It's gonna